Dear colleagues, welcome back to the second and final session in this inaugural series of webinars, where the focus has now turned to the themes of identity and meaning, traditional knowledge, and traditional craftsmanship. Did you have a good time with us yesterday? Hope you did. If you have not had a chance to join us in the first session, please feel free to take a look at our Facebook page and our YouTube account. And there you'll have the pleasure of enjoying our first excursion into this process. It's my special pleasure to welcome on your behalf two special guest speakers, colleagues who've represented key supporters of the journal over the decade and a half of its existence. Tim Curtis, who is the chief of the Intangible Cultural Heritage section of UNESCO and Secretary of the Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, to which positions he was appointed in January 2016, has been working in the field of culture in international context for nearly 20 years. Firstly, as a cultural anthropologist, and then for UNESCO on numerous international programs related to culture in the fields of heritage, cultural industries, cultural policies, and culture and development. From 2000 to 2002, he worked as a consultant for UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage section at UNESCO, primarily on the design and implementation of the Intangible Heritage projects, as well as on the launching of UNESCO's proclamation of masterpieces of oral and intangible heritage in 2001. In 2009, he was appointed as head of the culture unit in the UNESCO Bangkok office, with responsibility to coordinate and implement UNESCO's cultural program in Southeast Asia. Please welcome with me, and we will hear now from Tim Curtis.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to colleagues. My name is Tim Curtis, and I'm the Secretary of the 2003 Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage, and I send you my greetings from here in Paris at UNESCO headquarters. Unfortunately, I'm not able to join you for the live session today, but I am happy that I have the opportunity to address you through this video message. First of all, let me congratulate the International Journal of Intangible Heritage for this important anniversary. As we all know, the journal was created 15 years ago as the first international academic journal in this area. Its popularity has been consistently growing, and today it is indeed one of the most appreciated journals in the field. Over the past 15 years, the journal has allowed us to discover an extremely rich diversity of traditions and cultural expressions of people around the globe, shedding light on different issues related to the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage for future generations. The journal has provided great opportunity also for professionals, students, and research from all around the world by allowing them to interact, to share knowledge, and exchange experiences. By expanding studies and advancing the knowledge on various subjects related to intangible cultural heritage, the journal has played a fundamental role in promoting the understanding of the role of intangible heritage for peaceful coexistence and sustained development around the world. So on behalf of the Living Heritage of UNESCO, of the Living Heritage entity of UNESCO, and as Secretary of the 2003 Convention, I would like to commend the excellent work and the very pertinent and timely contributions the journal is making to the ongoing reflection of safeguarding living heritage. Your work has not only contributed to inform and encourage research, but it has also nourished the discussions held by states parties and their experts in the framework of the convention. It contributed to discussions that led to the identification of new emerging themes, such as the need to strengthen the role between living heritage and museums, or the new questions emerging around safeguarding the knowledge and skills related to craftsmanship, which are also the themes of this 15th session of the journal that you are launching today. So please allow me once again to congratulate all the authors, the contributors, the editors, and all of you who have successfully accompanied the journal over the last 15 years, and I wish you many more fruitful years to come. Having said that, all that remains is to wish you all productive discussions during this webinar, and I look forward to learning more about its outcome. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. And now our second special guest this evening is Ralph Seplik-Minton. With more than 30 years experience as a curator in different museums in Slovenia, including 11 years as the head of the Ethnographic Museum in Gorkhan. In 1986, he worked in Namto Tekshin Hong NGO in Shenzhen, China. His research work is focused in the field of Asian studies and museology. He served 2 terms as the chair of the Museums Association of Slovenia, 2 terms as the chair of ICOM Slovenia's National Committee. He has also served several times as a member of the board of ICME and ICOM Europe, and as a member of ICOM's task force on national committees and regional organizations. He has published over 180 articles and 3 books, and was co-author of the Museum's Guide in Slovenia. He was editor of the scientific periodical Ethnologue, or the Ethnologist, and was author or co-author of 35 museum exhibitions. In 2009, Ralph, my dear colleague, initiated the Romano Chon Roma Month, a cultural festival of the Roma Gypsy minority. It's my pleasure to welcome my dear colleague, Ralph Seplik, as our special guest to speak to you at this time.
Dear organizers and participants of this festive launch of Volume 15 of the International Journal of Intangible Heritage. It is a great honor to be invited as a guest speaker to such an important event. I will speak about UNESCO, Intangible Cultural Heritage and Ethnographic Museums as the chair of ICOM-ICME, the International Committee for Museums and Collections of Ethnography. UNESCO, an organization of the United Nations for Education, Science and Culture, was established on November 16, 1945, after the catastrophic World War II. In the present time, it works as a laboratory of ideas, establishing standards for paving the way of the universal agreements of ethical questions, which includes also the respect for cultural diversity. In 1972, UNESCO adopted on its 17th General Conference the resolution on the protection of the cultural and natural heritage, which in its Article number 1 defines cultural and natural heritage. According to this wide and universal definition, is cultural heritage the so-called tangible heritage, architectural, historical, and other monuments, groups of buildings and sites which are of outstanding universal value from the historical, aesthetic, ethnological, or anthropological point of view. The result of this convention is the UNESCO Register of World Heritage, which achieved a prestigious status, and each country is trying to include its heritage. Even the criteria are very difficult. One of the reasons is also that the monument placed into this register becomes a tourist attraction of the first category, and due to this also an important economic factor. But in UNESCO they started to realize that the world heritage is endangered also in its non-material, intangible form, because of industrialization, globalization, and other contemporary socio-economic, political, and civilizational processes The cultural heritage is disappearing and changing with an unimagined speed, and at the same time it is an object of growing exploitation, especially the traditional knowledge, intangible cultural heritage of the indigenous peoples. The Western multinational companies have anticipated in this at the time inaccessible traditional knowledge great possibilities of income. The pharmaceutical companies, especially in the Amazonian rainforest, started to explore systematically in the fields of ethnobotany, ethnopharmacy, and ethnomedicine. The knowledge should be mediated by the indigenous, but the profit should be made by the multinational companies. The West protected with its Institute of Copyrights and Patents its knowledge, creativeness, and inventions. But the so-called third or fourth world doesn't know such traditional knowledge protection because it is not a part of its materialistic way of comprehension of the world. We know the Native American chief Seattle's letter to the President of the United States of America. I quote, "The President in Washington sends word that he wishes to buy our land. But how can you buy or sell the sky, the land? The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air and the spark of the water, how can you buy them? Every part of the earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow, every humming insect, all are holy in the memory and experience of my people. We know the sap which courses through the trees as we know the blood that courses through our veins. We are part of the earth and it is part of us. The perfumed flowers are our sisters. The bear, the deer, the great eagle, these are our brothers. The rocky crests, the dew in the meadow, the body heat of the pony, and man all belong to the same family. The shining water that moves in the streams and rivers is not just water, but the blood of our ancestors. If we sell you our land, you must remember that it is sacred. Each glossy reflection in the clear waters of the lakes tells of events and memories in the life of my people. The water's murmur is the voice of my father's father." This letter describes so well the native people's attitude and way of thinking. And as we get more and more aware of the ecological problems of our contemporary world, these words are becoming more and more precious. The West, by the West I mean not only the USA and Europe, but the greedy civilization including China, Russia, and many other states of this world, is endlessly inventive at selling or stealing everything which encompasses us. The multinational companies started in the second half of the 20th century not only to cut out the lungs of our planet Earth, the huge vastness of the Amazonian virgin forests, and destroy the natural heritage of all inhabitants of our planet, and causing an ecological catastrophe, but also to exploit the intangible heritage of the so-called third and fourth world without any compensation. No wonder that even the political initiatives of the indigenous peoples and their cultures influenced on revaluation of the intangible heritage. UNESCO's initiative doesn't mean just a nostalgia for the dying old world, but it is an engaged action which wants to put the richness of the cultures of this world to its standpoint. From this point of view, I see the task of the International Journal of Intangible Heritage as an enormous value to this world. On its 32nd General Conference, UNESCO adopted on October 17, 2003, the Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. the aims of which are to contribute to better safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage, to ensure respect for it, raise awareness about its importance, and to provide for international cooperation and assistance. The Convention includes in the intangible cultural heritage oral traditions, expressions and language, performing arts, social practices, rituals, and festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, and traditional craftsmanship, recognized by communities as part of their cultural heritage with which they identify and try to safeguard. This intangible heritage, which is transmitted from generation to generation and is an alive tissue which causes the history, the origin of the identity, creativeness and cultural diversity, is reproduced by communities and groups, and it gives them a sense of common identity and continuity, and encourages the respect of the cultural diversity and human creativeness. UNESCO's Convention is a normative and obliged legal instrument besides the existent instruments in the field of the intangible heritage, which are engaged with the usage of intellectual property of the ethnological sources. The Convention deals with open questions of the intangible heritage, the relation between the tangible and the intangible heritage, and the measures to protect this heritage, which include adjusted coordination on a local, national, and international basis. The intangible heritage is threatened by standardization as a consequence of globalization, tourism, migrations, degradation of the environment, industrialization, migrations from the countryside, and armed conflicts. Meanwhile, as the tangible heritage is meant for survival long after passing away of the person who created it or ordered it, is the destiny of the intangible heritage much closer connection with its creators because it is transmitted by oral tradition. Importance of the heritage illustrates very well a Sikh proverb: if you lose your health, you lose something. If you lose your dignity, you lose a lot. If you lose your heritage, you are lost. UNESCO's protocols inaugurated heritage as the essence of collective identity and self-esteem. The tangible and intangible heritage are categories which are immanent to ethnology, cultural anthropology, and ethnographic museums. Museums and ethnology, cultural anthropology were changing in time and space, and they followed socio-political and theoretical changes. The origin and evolution of ethnographic museums were caused by colonialism. The colonial ethnology, cultural anthropology of the 18th and 19th century was focused on the research of the indigenous cultures of peoples in the colonies, better knowledge of the everyday life, social structures, rituals, religions, languages, etc., which was helping to easier administration in the colonies. Ethnographic museums are, by Peter van Meer's classification, specialized museums that collect, preserve, research, exhibit, and interpret ethnographic objects of its own culture or foreign cultures. But what is an ethnological object is much more than uniform. But even ethnology, cultural anthropology is not defined uniform, and not even ethnographic museums. The world and people are changing all the time. Even museums are not an exception in this process. Even we name a certain type of a cultural institution with the same name is an immense difference between the Cabinet of Curiosities of the 17th century and Eco Museum of the 20th century and the Virtual Museum of the 21st century. But even there is a continuous formation of new museums that are also remaining the so-called traditional museums. There is a number of the former colonial ethnographic museums who re-evaluated their mission and at the same time changed their names to museums of world cultures and alike. More than 30 years ago, in 1989, a museum definition was accepted by ICOM with amendments in 1995, 2001 and 2007. In September 2019, at the 25th ICOM General Conference in Kyoto, the MDPP Standing Committee for Museum Definition Prospects and Potentials, which was created after the 24th General ICOM Conference in 2016 in Milan, after thorough research and collecting numerous proposals, proposed an alternative museum definition, but unfortunately caused a big turmoil in the ICOM community. After Kyoto, a new MDPP2 was created, but even this caused even bigger turmoil in the ICOM community with the resignation of its president, Dr. Swai Aksoy, and several members of the ICOM Executive Board and MDPP2. And unfortunately, ICOM is in a crisis like never before. Some people are aware that museums are changing, some are not. The uniqueness of the cultural heritage of different parts of the world is taking shape in the process of invention, expansion of acculturation, and decaying and vanish. The museum world public is recognizing that it is very important to devote significantly to intangible information and even tangible sources, with encouraging interdisciplinary studies and reflection of its own activities. This is a challenge for the new generations, especially ethnologists, anthropologists, to whom the Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage is meant as a specific role in achievement of the UNESCO's aim of building peace and prosperity of the mankind. Dear organizers and participants, thank you for your attention. And I send you warm greetings from Slovenia and wish you to stay healthy in this uncertain time. Bye.
Okay, thank you very much. We have heard this very important message from the chair of the International Committee of Museums of Ethnology. And now it's time, ladies and gentlemen, to hear from our authors of the Intangible Heritage Journal. It's now time to turn the meeting over to our co-moderators for Session 2, two academics and heritage experts. Firstly, Dr. Hani Han, Professor Emerita of Yongbok National University and Director for the UNESCO Accredited Center of Intangible Cultural Heritage Studies here in Korea, and Eva Martinez, Chief of Cultural Heritage of the Instituto Hondureño de Antropología y Historia de Honduras. And again, both of my colleagues who have very impressive careers in this field are also active members of the editorial board of the journal and of this program committee. It's now your turn, my dear colleagues, to introduce our guest speakers. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alessandra. It's a pleasure to be here. And now I would like to introduce our first author, Gol Akturk, a PhD candidate in the Department of Architecture at TU Delft in the Netherlands. Her PhD research deals with the impacts of climate change on rural built heritage. Her research interest lies in the intersection of climate change and cultural heritage. Gol has worked in several architectural conservation and restoration projects, as well as archaeological excavations. She holds a master's degree in architectural conservation from the University of Edinburgh in the UK, and she's a member of ICOM Netherlands and the Center for Global Heritage and Development under Heritage and Environment. So welcome to Go Actor.
Thank you for organizing this. So today I will start by talking about my paper, which is Remembering Traditional Craftsmanship, Conserving a Heritage of Woodworking in Rize, Turkey. The case study I'm working on is Fındıklı in Rize, which is located in northeast part of Turkey. The city receives the highest precipitation all year round in the country, and this is why the area is rich with forests and different types of timbers, including walnut, pine, and juniper trees. The topography consists of steep terrains due to high altitudes. And on top of these terrains, there are stone infilled timber structures and storage houses built next to them. The Ministry of Culture and Tourism is responsible of documenting intangible cultural heritage at a national level, and there are two national inventories. The first one is listing the elements of intangible cultural heritage, and the second one, which is complementary to the first, is listing the key practitioners of the intangible cultural heritage. The residents in the area use the environment for the materials, for collecting materials of their dwellings, buildings, and also furnishings for about 200 years. And from the whole building to smallest components of the houses, the woodworkers left a cultural mosaic in the region with variety of timber products. The research consists of face-to-face unstructured interviews with 14 people from 4 different villages and the center of Fındıklı. It's the method used is snowball sampling, and the week-long survey was conducted in January 2019, and a second case visit was conducted in July 2019 for 2 weeks. The residents explained the builders of these houses, gave information about the builders of these houses. For instance, in one of the interviews, the house owner explained that the builder left his signature on the timber beam and the doors by leaving a Jewish symbol, and this dates back to 1829. But a later restoration was done by a local artisan in 1929. So this pattern was repeated for more householders, and according to what they said, the earlier examples show the Georgian builders' works, whereas the later examples reveal the works of local artisans. Like their predecessors, the builders built not only their houses, but also the public buildings such as schools, mosques, and bridges without having the expertise. And it was particularly difficult to cut up 10-meter long trees without the introduction of sawmills in the area. And one of the stonemason observed that in the construction of these buildings, the stone was placed 1 centimeter setback from the timber frame, and it was the uneven side of the stone was covered with plaster or timber. And although the evidence of this traditional lifestyle is endangered, some senior citizens still hold the memories of these traditions as a hobby. For instance, one of the homeowners started collecting these items from the age of 20, and personal diaries kept by his father explained that these wooden products were not just used as in furnishings, but also it was means of trade. And in the case of sandık, which is a wooden cabinet, is an example of this trade between Ottomans and Russians during Ottoman times. The storage houses are used as storing the food, but now they lost their significance because local people don't use them in storing food, but they're using them as pergolas. And the wooden craftsmen explained that the ornamentation, which is known as hasır, is very peculiar for this type of these structures. And he carved this ornamentation. First, he sketches the ornamentation on the front facade, and then he carves it, and then rubs it with emery in order to have a smooth surface. And in order to complete this ornamentation on a 5-meter long timber, it takes for him 10 days to finish it. So depending on the social and financial status of the locals, these ornamentations vary from simple to complex designs. But these structures are not considered without any ornamentations on them. Today, the difficulty of timber making is originating from finding a master who offers an affordable price for the labor and the material. And one of the interviewees explained that the Ministry of Forests sells these forest lands, at auction, and this decreases the quality of the timber, and these timbers are sold for nothing. For instance, chestnut tree, which was abundant once, are now rare, just like juniper tree. And these were widely used in not only construction of these buildings, but also storage houses. So it turned into a manufacturing process which caused the abandonment of this traditional craftsmanship. In 2008, Fındıklı Education Center collaborated with the architecture faculty in the Eastern Black Sea Technical University with an EU-funded project called Training Masters for the Rural Built Heritage in the Eastern Black Sea region. And following theoretical and practical courses, students completed learning a lot about these skills. And the project manager explained that with this EU-funded project, there was an increasing awareness in cultural heritage, and the number of listed buildings increased from 20 to 100. And this program paved way of serial documentaries and publications. And it also showed local people how important it is to restore their buildings. But this type of one-off projects are not enough to sustainably preserve and promote the cultural heritage if the community members are not supported by the local institutions. The traditions that created this rural built heritage can only be revived with archiving the oral histories, and it doesn't mean that these customs and practices will be froze frozen, but these will continue to evolve, and that we will have to accept this change. Creating an inventory of such practices can increase the number of jobs and qualified artisans, and also the studies in the field of preservation. The local achievements in the preservation of woodworking skills may enhance and may increase the transmission of knowledge between local artisans who can interpret their own heritage for future generations. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Gul. It's a remarkable project. And now we continue our session with another interesting article, which will be presented by Julie Nichols. She's the founder of the Vernacular Knowledge Research Group, established in 2017 at the University of South Australia. She lectures in architecture and sustainable design programs. Her main research areas link the fields of urban history and theory, urban cartography, and urban design through drawing and representation practices. Her interdisciplinary research interests include digital heritage, reconceptualizing vernacular architecture, Islamic and cross-cultural histories, and theories of spatial design in Indonesian cities. Welcome, Dr. Nichols.
Thank you very much. I'll share my screen. Oh, can't see the slide. Right. Okay. All right, thank you very much for having me. My presentation today is called The Arche Method in Archiving the Endangered Languages of Vernacular Architecture. So to start with, this paper that was published in the journal was, it's a critical reflection on two pilot case studies that recorded and documented vernacular architecture in Indonesia. And so we are, in this particular paper, critiquing the topic, or the term that we've called the Arche method, which is the process of documentation. So the Arche method is derived specifically around the creation of an archive of intangible and tangible cultural heritage. This particular critique of it involves examining vernacular architecture as a language, as a form of knowledge brought through an intersection and interconnection of tangible and intangible cultural expression. And because predominantly Arche's heritage and vernacular buildings have, that knowledge has been disseminated through oral traditions. So what is the Arche method? It's both a multimodal capture of cultural heritage typically at risk of destruction. It's also a curatorial process as well as a mode of dissemination. It's a rich sort of socio-cultural and creative practice in the making of those records. So the researchers and the community are kind of constantly exchanging information. So the process involves in the field documentation. It also identifies interior personal items of a space, as well as the sort of external animal husbandry, personal effects, to explain the uses of the buildings and in their particular environmental and cultural context. It offers a practical means to document, record and communicate traditional building types techniques and vernacular knowledge, based practices through and in the field cultural immersion for the research team that are on site for 1 to 2 weeks. So the creative aspects are realised in the drawings, in the multimodal captures such as photogrammetry, and then the curatorial aspect of bringing all this information together for digital dissemination. It also is a process of reconceptualizing the archive. It suggests that in this case, the archive is a sort of curatorial proposition and may be defined as a type of curation of primary data sets. So the archive curates and links primary artifacts and information to establish a narrative about these materials. As background to the context of ARCHE, this process and this method came about through coordination with our colleagues in Unshia University in Banda Aceh, but also primarily because of the devastation caused by the 2004 tsunami, which is I guess if you like, a contemporary example of lost cultural heritage. Its devastation included the destruction of significant buildings, landscape, and whole communities of people, as well as archival materials. So these events has motivated this sort of research project to deal with these sort of complex cultural conditions, processes of remembering, and making it accessible through heritage ethnography methods. So the ARCHE method is fundamentally a collaborative in nature and an iterative process developed from a grassroots level. This process reflects on the selection of what artifacts should be incorporated in the archive.
I'm sorry, Dr. Nichols, I have to interrupt for a second. Your screen is not in full mode and it stopped right here. So could you please check and see if you can correct it for...
It's not in full screen mode?
No, it's not.
Oh, beg your pardon. Is that better? Is that better?
It's... What we can do is you can speak and slide to next screen.
Julie, you haven't started the PowerPoint.
Oh, you can't see the PowerPoint.
It's only, and you've only got the side strip. It isn't showing the full image. You need to go to the bottom and start the PowerPoint, I think.
I'll stop sharing and do a new share. Sorry. Is that better? Is that any better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right, beg your pardon. Okay, so now here, right. So the new thinking around this process is to connect diverse areas diverse areas of thinking that does not sort of exist in one particular practice. So not just from looking at physical documentation of buildings, like drawing the buildings, we're also looking at interviews. In this slide, there's an example of one of the community members sketching ideas of their own to explain the process of how these buildings and how these kind of cultural contexts came about and how the knowledge is shared traditionally, which is orally, but trying to relay those ideas across different methods. So also because now in this born digital age, we are reflecting on patterns of thinking and working and collecting data and how this capture is only over a period of time, 2 weeks or so, this doesn't mean it's reflective of an entire, intangible and tangible heritage tradition. It's only a moment in time. So trying to explain that in the recording of the archive is quite a challenge. So also the concept of vernacular architecture, in a sense, is also embedded with sort of this linguistic metaphor. So a particular way of, this is why we compared the process of recording language compared to recording vernacular architecture in this paper, because we saw there was a lot of crossovers. Rappaport suggests that vernacular architecture, everyday buildings that have not been designed by an architect or engineer, and then not high style, monumental or grand. So in this sense, the materiality and the processes of building typically related through oral traditions means that they're not considered high-end tangible heritage. So in that way, architecture is a language and a way of communicating with its occupants and its visitors. So this idea helps to illustrate the significance of the Arche method as an archival approach. It provides a toolkit or a set of rules by which to understand a society and how it functions and what type of living environment it requires to fulfill the everyday needs of the community. So we see it as this form of communication, a language of historical knowledge or evidence, and a vernacular architecture potentially provides one of the most honest and diverse representations of society in this sense. So some of the modes of recording, but also the challenges of recording, is that there is in fact the risk of homogenization in the sense that, as I mentioned, a momentary capture might suggest that this is the way it's always done or the way it's always been, where in fact it's a completely dynamic process of production of a human environment that continually changes. So Emeka's work, a linguist Emeka's work, tries to, in his capture of African endangered languages, also identifies processes of recording in the same way that we do, diverse methods to try and establish that this is a really dynamic process. So the two pilot studies that we discuss in the paper is one of Arche and then one of where we sent a whole international team of about 70 people onto site from various universities to document some of the buildings you've seen in the earlier slides. And this is a drone image of the village. And then the other study was done in Bali, in Kintamani. And this also was quite a different challenge, again, compromised and at risk, not because of tsunamis, but potentially volcanic eruptions or over-tourism, given that these buildings and the land value means that tourist operators are keen to purchase these sorts of sites. So to sort of sum up in terms of the relationship between vernacular buildings and the capture of vernacular buildings and the capture of endangered languages, in this table sort of summarise the variety of recording processes that the Arche method encompasses, some from field work, so capture and selection of a site, ethnography in terms of observation of people in their social context, also theorising these ideas and around cultural production and their application, as well as involving the research team in terms of being local students and academics who we train in the method of capture from digital to manual. And this is reiterated with Emeka's processes of capture of his African endangered languages. So Again, some additional processes here is the language documentation practices, orthography, so how we produce a set of conventions to understand the building equally as Emeka understands language through a set of conventions. Then there's also the literacy that we try and promote through drawing, and Emeka tries to promote that through different understandings of oral culture, and dissemination, of course, through various exhibitions of our work, and Emeka's doing it through multimedia forms. And then finally, in the production of the archive and the curation of the artifacts, and how that brings together the, I guess, future sort of ontological organization of knowledge. So that's the end of my synopsis of the ARCHE method. There's many paradoxes and challenges in the process, but it's we're continuing this work with other pilot studies to see where that takes us. So thank you very much for listening today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nichols. Yeah, we don't have enough time to develop the whole ideas, but that's why we have to read the articles and get into the details of this interesting project. And we're also very glad to present our next author, Richard Stoffel, professor in the School of Anthropology at the University of Arizona in the United States. He is the principal investigator for a number of research studies funded by several federal agencies, such as the National Park Service. His cultural anthropology research team facilitates the sharing of important cultural heritage understandings between museums, interpretative programs, and the Native Americans throughout the United States, and for the African ancestry people in the Caribbean. These heritage studies potentially contribute to more accurate understandings of the past, increased sensitive policies, and better public education. So, Dr. Stoffel.
Get it. Hello. There you go, Joe. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very impressed with this wonderful effort of turning words into pictures and stories. I'd like to talk briefly about the paper that we produced called Living Universe or Geofacts. And I would like to thank my grandson for making sure I don't goof this up. Our research is focused in the Southwest and Utah and 3 parks. And the purpose of the research is to develop a relationship between the parks, the national parks, and culturally associated or culturally affiliated Native American tribes, people who either live nearby or live far away, but were once part of the landscape and have left cultural resources that they interpret during these studies. The participating tribes and pueblos in the 3 projects, the Arches Project, the Canyonlands National Park, and the Hovenweep National Park, are presented here. I'm taking one sort of recommendation out of about 347 recommendations that they made in the 3 studies to the Park Service. And this one recommendation is about, highlights a difficulty, which we call environmental divide. The tribes come and spend time with us. We support their involvement through funds from the Park Service. Some of these times are in group interviews. There we see some of our team talking, and this is a group of the Zuni tribal or Zuni Pueblo representatives And sometimes we have individual interviews where we sit and talk with people. What we're going to talk about today is the difficulty of communication across cultural systems. And this particular difficulty is created by the fact that there is an epistemological divide with regards to three pieces of information. From a Native American standpoint, the world is alive. It has rights. It's sentient. And it has agency to do what it wants to, including move and restructure its location. The world also has dimensions. What we experience sort of on a day-to-day basis is one of those dimensions, and there's other dimensions that exist in the world. And finally, arches, and that's going to be our focus. Arches are portals through stone to these other dimensions. So we're going to look a little bit at that one concept, that one epistemological divide that is difficult to understand. Here are the two of the three parks in southern Utah. This is Arches National Park. This is Canyonlands, and most of the discussions will be from Arches. It will be from this. When you go through a portal, you get to someplace else, but also things or creatures or other things, stories or songs on the other side of the portal can come to you. And so we have different kinds of portals we're going to talk about, mostly, of course, Arches, but there's all other portals that we'll end up talking about also. The Arches National Park has approximately 2,000 different arches. And this is seen as a design at creation by all of the Native Americans who participated. This place was designed with a purpose, and the purpose is to have interactions between Native American people and whatever's going on the other side of these portals. This is one particular large sandstone that has two large arches in it, and each arch points roughly in a different direction. Here's another one that has a very large opening as well as a very small opening. And these are seen as ways of looking at the stars, the skies, and going to other places. In Canyonlands and other places, but they're particularly in Canyonlands, there are these alcoves, and the alcoves are basically eroded areas. See the erosion sign, and in here is a sheltered place, and in these sheltered places are often paintings of spiritual remnants or spiritual beings. And one of the interpretations, not all of them, is that these were, when the beings on this dimension were finished, they passed through the portal into the other side, and they left their own image of who they were and what they'd been doing. Other kinds of portals in the sacred landscape are hoodoos. This is a hoodoo. That's a hoodoo. And then views of sky islands. Sky island is a technical concept by ecologists and talks about remnant animals and plants over the last 10,000 or so years. Hoodoos are seen as living, as kinds of creatures, if you will, kinds of beings, and they can do things for you, and often a little dirt from the bottom of the hoodoo is taken back to the reservation where the people live and becomes a part of ceremony. The broader context within which we're talking about in Arches and Canyonlands is a very large area. And Indian people don't see two parks, they see this big area. They see the interactions of two rivers. This is the Green River here, and the canyons associated with it. This is the junction of the Green River right there, and then there's the Colorado River that comes down here and meets with the green. Together they go through and go to the Grand Canyon and ultimately the Sea of Cortez. Along the sides of these rivers are also places. The rivers themselves are kind of portals in the sense that you can go into them. There's things that live in them, but they themselves as living beings can carry messages and information from where you are. And this is a ceremonial area at the edge of the Colorado River near Moab. This is a panel that has, I don't know, hundreds of peckings, old peckings in an area quite a ways off the ground. And one of these peckings, which is indicative of what occurred here, is a large basket. We're going to see this basket again in a minute. And it is a gathering basket, and it is the symbol of the original origin of humanity. All humanity came and was in this basket. And so this is a celebration of the origin of people, all humans. This is an example in this sort of brief little presentation. This is an example of how what is otherwise a very complex and very curious painting in one of these alcoves. This painting is wonderful, and everybody goes by and says, wow, the painting's wonderful. But when you work with Indian people, they see things, they observe things, and they talk to you about things. In this case, a portion of the painting is blown up for us today. And over here and over there are generally non-interpreted parts of the painting. The Indian people says, well, that's an Indian woman, and on her back is one of those baskets. So that's her gathering. There's another one lady gathering there, gathering seeds for food. And we also have here what they're gathering. That's Orosopsis haemanoides, or Indian rice grass. And so within a small segment of one panel, we have an understanding of the people and how they're represented, but they're not just represented as doing domestic tasks. You see the animals coming up to the spiritual being, and you see the interrelationship of other kinds of spiritual beings, which would otherwise be not interpretable. What about Hovenweep? We need to mention Hovenweep. It's got the most elaborate set of structures, I think, in North America. They're buildings that have lasted in this wonderful condition for since at least the 1300s. And they've held together, and they were very carefully produced, but the purpose for these buildings has been disputed in many ways. There's been a question of what were they for. Europeans see them as lookout towers to ford off enemies and other kinds of things like that. And the Indian people say, no, these are here to talk to the mountains. This is a sacred mountain over here, and you'd want a good place to be and talk to it and send prayers to it. This one down here, and so many of these buildings are made at, are made at the junction of canyons and springs. And the prayers go into the ground, into the spring, back up into the mountains, the sky islands. And so there's a two-way track of prayers and energy. And it's part of the weather control and weather understanding. Some of the structures don't make any sense as residential places. For example, here we have near a spring, we have a tower built around a rock. And the question is, why would you build a tower around the rock unless you want to get in there and pray into the rock and have the rock carry the prayers to other dimensions? Again, you have a fundamental start here. You have to believe there's other dimensions and believe that the rock, it can be a willing partner in carrying your messages to other places. So this is one example of the kinds of complexities we have in environmental heritage, environmental communication with everybody, with lots of people, Native Americans, We had a nice talk yesterday about the Maoris in New Zealand, which could have been this talk. I mean, it was so similar in many respects. So there you go. We hope that the paper helps bring some of these issues forward. And we hope that the concept of not just difficulties of communication, but communication that are difficult because they're based on epistemological divides. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Richard. And now I give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Ham.
Han He, we can't hear you. Your microphone is muted.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm introducing the next speaker, Undamdi C. Ajibili. He's going to present the tangible and intangible heritage of the Igbo. And he's an African historian with a PhD in history. He currently lectures in the Department of History and International Studies at the University of Nigeria, where he teaches both undergraduate and postgraduate courses. His research focuses are in the areas of African history and culture, diaspora studies, and international political economy and foreign policies. Okay, please, Ajibili, is your turn.
Thank you very much. I am Nnamdi Ajibili of the University of Nigeria. I am to speak on harnessing the indigenous cultural systems of Africa for regrowth, extrapolations from Igbo land in southeastern Nigeria. Yeah, I want to say that it is apt to comment that the burn of Africa's development in all ramifications is the neglect by Africans of the indigenous cultural peculiarities of the continent. If you engage in a panoramic excursion into some of the traditional societies, you realize that the continent has a rich cultural heritage with which the ancestors of modern Africa harmoniously waded through life. And so you realize that the confusion, backwardness, and hybridization that is prevalent in contemporary Africa are the result of the swallowing hook, line, and sinker of almost everything that is foreign. It is important to note, it is important to state that every human collectivity is naturally endowed with a peculiar cultural system, which is their symbol of identity, and with which they can achieve, every human group can achieve real progress. In Africa today, the two dominant religious cultures, that is Christianity and Islam, with their long history of violence, is not indigenous Africa, you know? And the particular reference to the Igbo of southeastern Nigeria, the Igbo has a belief in a long line of divinities, that is with regard to their indigenous religious culture. They have a belief in a long line of divinities, beginning from the supreme god, which in Igbo rendition is called Chukwu. They also believe in community deity, which they call Allah. The ancestors of the living dead is called Indishie. Then there is the God personality of every individual, which we call Chi. Then numerous spirits, known as Anusi. These divinities are all legends of God. And as intermediaries of God, it is through communing with them that the individual can achieve personal desires for his enduring well-being and that of the larger society. Again, communing with these divinities involves the use and offering of numerous material and non-material elements, such as the tarum elastica, which in Igbo language is called ofo. Then there is also the use and offering of kola nut, guinea pepper, food, water, palm wine, fowl, goat, and numerous other kinds of animals. White chalk called nzu. Then divination is also part and parcel of the issue or the idea of communing with these divinities. Then there is also prayer and liturgy, among others. The various sections or categories of Igbo traditional system are collectively known as omenala. That is the way in which the Igbo people do their things, as handed down from their forebears. If we take the example of Ofo, that is the tarum elastica, the Igbo sees this tree as very, very sacred, and it is part and parcel of the instruments of communing with the divinities. The tree, before you get the tree, it is customary to go where the tree is located, and you can pick from the ground whichever branch of it has fallen. That branch, short branch, must always be dried, and it falls down on its own. Nobody goes to cut it from the branches. It must dry up there and falls on the ground. Before you pick it, you make some offerings of kola nuts to the ancestors, invoke their presence, and ask them for permission to pick the offer. It is a sacred instrument of communion with the divinities, the deities, and spirits and ancestors of the Igbo people. With it, once you have consecrated it, it becomes a symbol of authority within the family. It becomes an instrument of communion with the ancestors, with all the spirits, with all the deities, and the Supreme God. And so Ofo is revered by the Igbo people as a sacred instrument. It is used in prayer, it is used in liturgy, in reciting liturgies. And all during such prayers and recitations, all who are gathered around usually concur with the saying, Ise, which is the same as saying Amen in Christian religion, which means let it be so. And so, I want to say that there has been lackadaisical attitude by modern Igbo people with regard to traditional practices. But the point remains that indigenous cultural systems are very potent instruments with which the individual, the community, and the society at large can achieve real progress. I want to state categorically that if Africans can hold tenaciously to their peculiar cultural systems, real progress will be achieved in all the African societies and in all departments of human endeavor, just as is done by most Asian countries. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor. The next speaker is Agnieszka Paulaska Mainville. She's going to give us a very interesting presentation on the tanning moose hide, and she's an associate professor with the Department of First Nation Studies at the University of Northern British Columbia, Canada. She completed her MA and PhD at the University of Manitoba in the Native Studies Department in Winnipeg, Canada. Dr. Pulaski Maniville works with numerous indigenous communities across Canada and examines customary governance, sustainable livelihoods, and natural and cultural resource stewardship through the intangible cultural heritage lens. She's Executive Director of Northern British Columbia Public Interest Research Group and a lead author on the IPBS Values Assessment. Her kinship relations and personal measures to preserve her own diverse cultural traditions, languages, oral expressions, and culinary skills guide her engagement in this area of research. Okay, would you do your presentation, Dr. Pulaski Maniville?
Are located in central British Columbia, which is on the left-hand side of Canada, so on the western side of Canada. And the Daket are sort of in the center, and their territory extends very far and very wide. However, taking a step back a little bit, when Indigenous people were colonized in Canada, they were, of course, dispossessed of their land, and they were forced to receive formal education, such as the images here. There was this policy called killing the Indian in the child in the 1800s, which meant that kids were forced to, from their homes, removed from their homes, forced into schools, residential schools, where basically they were stripped away of their cultural identity. So there was a severe loss of language, cultural practices, a loss of knowledge. And the two images that you see on screen here, the top one is of girls being in one of these schools learning how to read. And the second image is of a boy coming into residential school and then a couple of years later leaving the residential school, stripped away of his cultural identity. So this residential school system was one of many mechanisms that led to a break in transmission of intangible cultural heritage. Because due to the schools, cultural heritage was not shared, it was not passed down because of loss, because of shame, lack of knowledge associated with some of the cultural practices, and of course a lot of the elders passing before some of that knowledge passed down. So what we did is we decided to revive that knowledge, and I'm a university professor, and I decided to create an experiential learning class that helped revive some of these knowledges that the Daket people who are here and their knowledges in academia. Our university is located on Daket territory, and this was a perfect combination of using community-based knowledge in academia through such a course. So what we did is we merged Daket traditional practice of tanning moose hide in a course in academia. So we turned in an activity, a Daket or indigenous activity that usually lasts 3 months, and it's community-based and it's set in autumn. And we turned this into a 3-week credited course in the spring, because that's how the semesters worked out. So this is one of the posters that we had for the course to help promote it and to teach students about not only cultural heritage, but get them to experience cultural heritage at its best and by hand. So while what is interesting about the class is, well, we have the schedule here, is that the course followed the natural process of the hide, the processing hide. So when the hide was soaking, it was drying or resting, the students were either in the classroom learning about museums and repatriation, intangible cultural heritage in general, economic development, or cultural revitalization and language revitalization. The hide was kind of doing its own thing. And then when we needed to work on the hide, we were out and about working and processing the hide. And this is a picture of our classroom. So when we talked about some of the articles and some of the readings that the students had, we usually use the time while we were processing the hide to discuss the readings. And as part of cultural revitalization, we also focused a lot of language. Dakyafgoni, which is the language used by the Dakyaf people, is actually one of the endangered languages in Canada. And it is set to perhaps even disappear if not for the immense work of elders trying to save it now. So we put up one of the most important keywords that could be used in the classroom so that students learn to absorb them and just use them naturally as part of the hide processing. So we use, for example, amatsti, which is frame, which is knife, danizos, of course, which is the moose hide. So there was our goal to make sure the students appreciate the language that unfortunately is endangered at this point. These are the images here, photo, that show this range of other intangible cultural heritage activities and elements that are part of just a process of moose hide tanning. The first one is this immense hide that you see on the left-hand side that Yvonne is holding. And the heritage behind that is learning how to hunt a moose in a way that the bullet doesn't pierce too much the middle of the skin, and then skinning it so that it is all in one piece. That is in itself an immense cultural heritage element. Of course, on the right-hand side, we have the actual processing. So this is the wringing of the hide step. And this wouldn't be made without Ron, who's sitting in the back, who's standing in the back, Yvonne's husband, who's designed and revived a traditional ringer that has been used by the Dakyaf for generations that basically disappeared in terms of usage. And he rebuilt one in their backyards to make sure we can finish the hides. We also had a range of tools that were used, as the bottom picture shows. So we had metal knives and scrapers that were made not only specifically for this activity. So Ron was able to make knives out of car parts in some ways to show the angles and to show the specific weights and basically what was needed by the skinners. And at the top picture, you see the students stretching the hides. And they gained an appreciation outside of the classroom that intangible cultural heritage is more than just something that you have. It's something you consistently have to work at, you have to work on. And it's a lot of hard work, because tanning a hide to make the moccasins of the image that I showed you initially, you have to put a lot of strength and work in and spend your days completing these tasks. And as part of the class, we also had a couple of elders come in to bake traditional bannock. So we had an activity. The activities also permitted elders to come in and bake for us some of the foods that were traditionally eaten out on the land. And the bottom picture shows the scraping, the students. This is near the final product. You see how large the hide is on the frame. And part of the kind of the cultural heritage is that we were able to transmit this traditional activity and make it into a very kind of suburban activity, but yet still maintain its Dakyaf presence. So overall, I don't want to kind of give away the article, but I wanted to share that we had a lot of success and a lot of shortcomings as part of the class. However, I do want to leave the reader of the article to actually get some of the details, but I wanted to point out a couple of things that we learned. One, from this class, the students learned to appreciate just the idea of intangible cultural heritage, as well as own heritage. A lot of the students who come into the classroom in our Northern University are Indigenous. A lot of them do not know who they are and don't know the elements of their heritage. So this class helped them appreciate elements of heritage. It also provided them with the tools to recognize and perhaps safeguard elements of intangible cultural heritage in their own communities. And finally, what we were most proud of is that we achieved something that a lot of people told us cannot be done. We merged or weaved two pedagogies together. So we weaved two institutions, two pedagogies, two ways of knowing, or two ways of teaching and learning into one activity. And we did it. It could be done. So our article is basically meant to assist other educators to work with communities and to help Indigenous as well as just non-Indigenous communities to rely on academia to help transmit intangible cultural heritage, as well as enhance student learning. And from that, I thank you. So, Snachalia, Dakef, Jinkuyame, and Sahamida.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Paulaska Mainville. And your article is very informative and very useful for the ICH transmitters in particular. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, next speaker is Jose Antonio Lorenzo Tampoya. He received his degree in international studies, majoring in European studies at De La Salle University in Manila. In 2015, he finished his graduate degree in teaching English language in the same university. He has been teaching at the university since 2011 in the Department of English and Applied Linguistics of the BRO, Andrew Gonzalez College of Education. While he specializes in academic reading and writing, he is active in the promotion of Philippine church cultural heritage. He pioneered Art Secraf PA in 2016, a webpage dedicated to the promotion and documentation of the ecclesiastical art forms in the Philippines and to educating the stewards of Catholic religious images, the Camareros. Okay, it's your turn.
A pleasant day to everyone. I'm Jose Antonio Lorenzo Tamayo from De La Salle University in Manila, Philippines. And in volume 15 of IJIH, I wrote the article, Contemporary Camareros, Santo Sponsorship in the Philippines Today. So before I begin my lecture, let me define or clarify some terms. So the first one would be santo or poon, and these are Catholic religious images. And if you own a santo or poon, you are actually called a camarero in the colonial period until today. And we also have the ilustrado or people coming from the educated class in 19th century Philippines, and the principalia or members of the local nobility or local elite during the Spanish colonization period. Now, you might be wondering what are the reasons on why I conducted or write this particular study. There are two primary reasons, and the first one is Santo art is quite prolific in the Philippines. Later on, as you will actually see, from past to present, because of our Catholic orientation in the Philippines, Santo art is abundant. And in fact, there is a renewed interest in Santo art in the Philippines, primarily because of internet. So in line with that, there is a strong presence of camarerosship in the Philippines today. So there's a lot of youngsters or the new generation of camareros who are into Santo art. And of course, another reason would be I'd like the camareros to be present in academic literature. Now, so Bell categorized the Santos in the 1950s into distinct categories. So the first one, according to him, would be the official works. And like in this example, we can see that official works were normally commissioned by missionaries or the early missionaries for the use of churches and convents. So this particular retablo composed of different Santos was in Giwan in Eastern Samar. Now, we also have the popular images, and the popular images were actually made by regional artisans according to the discussion of Loy Quintos. And these particular Santos were commissioned for private use. And those who made them, the local carvers, would actually replicate what's actually inside the churches, they try their best to make the iconography accurate as much as possible. However, in terms of refinement, they're still, let's say it's quite crude compared with the latter examples later on. Another one is a type of popular image, which is what we call as the primitive, the mamarachos, or in Gatbonton's word, it's naif santo. So these are also privately owned santos or for private veneration at home. But the only difference is that it's the owner who was the one who created the santo. So in this example, it's like it's a reinterpretation of some sort of the actual image. Like to the left is Saint Catherine of Alexandria. Supposedly, she should be holding a sword with a broken sprocket. But in this case, she seems to be holding some sort of a palm leaf. Another would be to your right, the image of Saint Vincent of Ferrer. If you look at the child there, the child should be holding a trumpet instead of a drum. But in this example, this reinterpretation, and this is actually, we actually call as naif santo. The other, which I would dwell on in my study, would be the ornate ivory or the ornate wooden santos. And for the ornate ivory, if you look to your left, this is an image of Our Lady of the Holy Rosary with Saint Dominic de Guzman and Saint Catherine of Siena. It's enclosed in a vitrine glass, or we call this as a verina. And these kinds of santos proliferated during the 19th century Philippines because it's quite expensive. And those who own vast tracts of land called hacienderos, and they are normally the ilustrados or members of the Principalia, they were the ones who commissioned these pieces for their veneration at home, for their personal oratories or family oratories. If you look at the right picture, this is a picture of the death of Christ, or the crucified Christ. And this was now in a collection in a museum in Spain. And it's the detallado style, but everything is actually made of pure ivory. Now, the other one is the ornate wooden santos. To your left are images of the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And these are processional images. They are actually called as the mannequin because they could be dressed. And these normally join processions or solemnities in churches, local churches. The one to the right is also an ornate wooden santo done in classical style. It's Saint Lucy and could be found in one of the churches in Pampanga. Now, for my research work, I conducted my study for roughly a year, and it's between 2018 and 2019. I conducted interviews with 15 camareros and also surveyed 54 of them. And I used Google Forms. I shared it through my Artis Sacra page, Facebook page, and through my personal Facebook wall. Now, after conducting my study, I was able to categorize the present-day camareros. So you have to remember that before, the camareros in the old system of sponsorship were only the old rich, or those who are members of the Principalia, or were members of the Ilustrado class, members of the nobility. But now, given the changing economic landscape of the Philippines and more opportunities along the way, we have the rising number of the middle class and the new rich. And this was also acknowledged in the work of Benida since 1996. And this has propelled the commissioning of more religious images or the santos in the Philippines today. And through my current research work, I was able to categorize the camareros into 4. So the first type are heirs of camareros from the Ilustrado or Principalia families. So they simply inherited these images or icons and continue with the sponsorship until today. The second type would be camarero number 2, and these are the financially independent camareros today coming from the middle class and the new rich. So these are the new camareros. They have the money, they have the means, and they would commission more santos. Camarero number 3, and these are the selected by parish priests or church organizations to become camareros, which will lead to the 4th category, which are the camareros by accident. And what do I mean by being a camarero by an accident? Probably Camarero 1 and Camarero 2 would simply opt to sell their Santos, and those who acquired them later on would continue with the sponsorship, and suddenly they have become Camareros by accident. Sometimes the heirs of Camareros and Camarero type number 1 would not be interested anymore with the tradition because they're more liberal in their mindset. They're probably busy, so they would transfer the ownership to Camarero number 4, and you become a Camarero by accident in that particular case. Now, conclusion-wise, we've come to realize that Santos have become refined through the years. So as you can see from the many examples, from the popular images to the naive images to the more ornate ones, ornate wood or ornate ivory, it has become refined. It's more beautiful, and until now, the same aesthetics from the Ilustrados were and are being applied by the present day Camareros. And being a Camarero today is not really exclusive, but financial means is really a great factor or indicator. So if you have more money, then you can have more options on how to create the santo, from the materials until the vestment, compared with if you don't have much money or much means, then you simply rely on your creativity. And being a Camarero today has two social cultural functions, and the first is it is both a commodity and cultural capital. So if you have a santo today, it seems to imply, given the fact that there's a rising number of middle class and the new rich, it's like being accepted to society, or it becomes a symbol or a status symbol of some sort. And the Camareros are quite a unique community in the Philippines because most of them are actually interacting with each other, which is not present in the old form of sponsorship. So to get to know more about my research work, I hope you can actually download it through the website of the International Journal of Intangible Heritage. And thank you very much. And I would like to extend my congratulations to the International Journal of Intangible Heritage for the successful production of its volume 15. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tamayo. Your article give us a very good understanding of contemporary Camareros. Thank you again. Okay, now I'm sorry to tell you that we don't have a Q&A session, but any participant will send us questions and inquiries through email or chat box. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much for all of the speakers this evening, and to the co-moderators for moderating the session so ably. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to have welcomed you today. And before I say any concluding remarks, I'd like to give the floor to Director Kwang Ho Lee, whose leadership of this division has enabled us to have this very successful inaugural webinar. So I'd like to turn the floor now to Director Lee. You have the floor, sir.
네, 안녕하세요. 국립민속박물관 이광호입니다. 국제저널 무형문화유산 15호 웨비나를 준비해 주시고 기획해 주신 우리 알렉산드라 커밍스 위원장님을 비롯해서 현지 위원님들, 그리고 기조 발표를 해주신 많은 분들, 그 다음에 15호에 그 논문을 기재해 주시고 오늘 어제 이틀 동안 좋은 발표를 해주셨던 이 필자 여러분들에게 감사드리고요. 마지막으로 이 웨비나에 참여해 주신 많은 시청자 여러분들에게도 감사드립니다. 코로나19를 잘 극복할 수 있도록 해주시고, 앞으로 저희 민속박물관에서는 국제저널 무형문화유산을 더욱 발전시킬 수 있는 그런 하나의 노력들을 할 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Kwan-ho Lee, Division Director of National Folk Museum of Korea. I'm really glad to see everyone, and I'm really honored to invite all of you to this, our first launch of the webinar. And I would like to thank everyone, including the authors from the journal, executive board members, especially to Ms. Alexandra Cummins for initiating this event. Even though we are having a tough time due to Corona-19, I would like to say a very promising words that we will get through all of this hard time. And thank you all for joining us today. And I would like to see you or meet you in near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
감사합니다. Thank you very much, Director Lee, for that very kind message. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've now come to the end of our proceedings, and it's only left for me to say how much I very much appreciated all of you participating and making this a very active and very provocative session, where we have covered virtually the whole world in a very short space of time, and shown both the diversity but also the commonalities of many of these human experiences. It's not possible for me to speak in a great amount of detail at this point, but it has been a true honor and a pleasure to have worked with all of the authors in bringing this journal to conclusion, to have worked with my close colleague, text editor Dr. Pamela Inder, without whom this would not be possible as a successful conclusion. To say that the work of the Secretariat, particularly In-hee Lee and Yun-ha Lee, who have always been by our side, and the technicians today for ably managing all the logistics and the technical requirements that go into presenting a program such as this. And we also very much appreciate the work of the program committee, who really worked tirelessly around the clock to ensure the success of this event. Finally, I want to say a few words to thank Director General Yoon, who made it all possible with his early commitment and endorsement of the proposal, and ensured that we had the resources to make it happen. Ladies and gentlemen, a publication like the journal is just not possible. The quality of it, the breadth of it, the depth of it are not possible without the insights that you and your writings and your papers offer. I have said before, and I'd like to say it again, each journal is like a new education. And I'm very much appreciative and profoundly moved by the opportunity now on this occasion and in this climate to have met so many of you personally. It's a great pleasure, a great honor, and we look forward to welcoming you, as Director Lee has said, in the near future. Thank you for your attention this evening. Thank you for your excellent discourses. And now it's time to say goodbye. Stay safe, stay well, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future through some new portal, right, Richard?
Yes, absolutely. New portals.
Thank you, and good evening.
Good job, everybody.